Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today I realized that in all of our videos and talk about resins and 3D printing, we have never talked about how to make 3D models and the software that we tend to use. So this is going to be kind of like a short overview about those bits of software. Just a disclaimer that this video is not sponsored in any way, shape, or form by any of these software companies, but if you want to connect, just let me know. So the first application that we're going to be talking about is called Shapr3d. And I actually use it here on my iPad. This is a 12.9-inch iPad Pro M1. It's brand new, it's shiny, it's nice, it's fast, really fast, with the Apple Pencil. Now, Shapr, if you don't have an iPad, Shapr is available on, I believe, just Macs right now as a desktop app. So you can do the 3D modeling and you can transfer between your iPad and the desktop very seamlessly. It's really, really convenient. There is a little bit of a learning curve. I find that the iPad version is much more intuitive, but that's mostly just because you can drag and use your fingers and has more touch application versus the other, which is using mouse and keyboard. So you kind of have to, get used to the keyboard if you're not familiar already. I would classify myself as almost like an iPad power user. I do have this iMac, but we mostly use it for just things that you absolutely cannot do on the iPad. If someone would please come out with a slicer for the iPad that I could just use on my 3D printer, that would be amazing. At the moment, I don't think there's any at all, so it's kind of an open market. Hint, hint. Anyway, so let's get into this. So let's open up Shapr. Let's go into a new project over here in the corner. And this is the canvas that we're basically going to be working with. You always work in an X, Y, and Z type of orientation. And you can see up here in the corner, this cube, that it has labeled everything accordingly, which is really, really nice. And then, of course, it's got the colors, so you don't really have to think too much about it. But let's go to front, because we're going to be working on this straight on. Now, a ring that is a US Canada size 10 has a diameter of 19.8 millimeters. So let's just kind of account for some shrinkage there. Let's say it's about 20 mil. So let's draw a circle. We'll anchor the middle of the circle to the origin, which is the center of the X and Z axis. And we'll turn that to 10 for a radius. So it's about 20 mil. Oh, sorry, it's not about. This is exact. This is exactly what it should be. And if you rotate around, you can see that we now have a flat working drawing. And from there, let's say we wanted to draw this out into a cylinder. Now we have a cylinder that is 5 millimeters tall by 20 millimeters diameter. We're going to go back though, because we're going to turn this into a ring, not a cylinder. So let's draw another circle. Make sure we're tapped on that one. Let's make this a radius of 12. Actually, you know what? Let's go 14. Now let's grab the center of this circle. Drag that to the Z origin. And we're just going to offset it. If we want it to be exact in the center, no problem, if that's the kind of ring you want. But I want a signet ring, so it's going to be a little bit thinner on the bottom of the shank, right down in this area, and a little bit thicker up top there. Okay, so this, we can just double check. The thickness is 2 millimeters, which I know from experience is a nice thickness there. And now we're ready to go. So let's tap on the outside. What happens when we do a sketch is we're always working with closed loops. If you don't have a closed loop, if it's like 99.9% there, it won't register as something that you can then extrude. Extruding is creating the 3D shape. So there we have a ring. And you can see there, if we tap on the inside, it shows us the diameter. And if we wanted to adjust it live, we can do that just by dragging in and out, no problem. But we're going to do that a little bit later. So now we have the basics. Now this is obviously not the most comfortable looking ring. It's pretty solid. It's essentially a brick. So let's turn to the left or right. It doesn't really matter. We'll just tap on left. And now we're going to do some drawing. So not only is there going to be a taper here on the bottom, which we said was 2 millimeters, we're going to do a taper on the sides. So let's just draw a line and we'll find the exact middle of this piece. And that's always marked out with this little purple dot. Let's make the ring, let's make the bottom of the ring, oops, not working very well. Let's make the bottom of the ring 3 millimeters. So now we've marked out 3 on here. You can see those two little anchor dots right there and there. And let's drag a line. Let's draw a line up to the corner and up to the corner. And we're going to draw a box around this, encompassing the entire piece. Okay. And let's draw a line across. So now if we zoom out, go to layers, you can hide that body. Now we have this shape. I'm not really sure if that's like a trapezoid. It's a shape, whatever. So we gotta make sure we have this. Let's move the object over, because if we were to extrude this out, then we're creating an object. But if I extrude this out over another existing object, you'll see it's cutting away material. And it's turning it into that nice tapered look that we were going for. So you got to think a little bit differently when you're working in this app. There are other ways to do this, of course, but and I can talk about those later, but we're not going to focus on them right now. This is what I've got to work with, and it's a fairly simple way of doing it. All right, so there is our more comfortable looking ring shape. Now all these lines are of course still very, very hard edge. If we were to just throw these in the printer, they would come out rock solid, 90-degree corners. It would be very sharp. It would be very uncomfortable. So with Shapr, what we can do is tap on these edges that are sharp, and we can either put a bevel on them by dragging in, and you'll see what that does. It adds a very, again, a sharp corner, but it takes off the edge. Or we can cancel that, select those edges again, and we can drag the opposite direction and get what's called a fillet. Fillets are full rounded edges. So bevels or fillets. I'm going to bring it in 1 millimeter. And I think that's a general, looks great. Like it doesn't look bad. It looks nice and comfortable. And yeah. So let's go to the next step. Signet rings almost always have a flat top in which you can either engrave a design or you can set a stone, both of those things, or do whatever you like. So let's do that. I'm actually going to set a stone in this, I think. Let's plan to set a stone. This is all just theory, by the way. We're not actually going to do this. But let's say our stone is a 10 millimeter diameter flat back cabochon. And you'll notice as well, this is snapped so that this circle is now in the center of the ring. We have 10 millimeters to work with. Now I'm going to go over here to the left and tap offset, and I'm going to make sure it says loop. Now I could just draw another circle, or I can just do offset loop and make, let's say 2.5 millimeter walls. So let's do this entire thing. Let's go 4 millimeters. We can always go back and make it a little bit thinner if we want to later on. So we've just basically created a puck, a cylinder, and dragged it over to our ring. And you can see that we now have two separate objects that are intersecting. We'll go to front and we'll make sure that everything's lined up in the center with that origin line right there. Okay. Now it's not flawless, but what we can do, we can double tap on our ring shank, double tap on the puck, go over here to union on the left, keep originals, yes, good. And now when we double tap, we have one solid object. So this is now one thing. And before, if I had tapped on, I wouldn't have had the option if I hadn't unionized these. I couldn't have grabbed on this corner and dragged it out had I wanted to. So let's drag it out 5 millimeters because that gives us a really nice looking curve right in here. I think that looks really nice. And we'll do the other side. Drag that out to 5 millimeters. Looks good. And let's deal with this undercut. Let's grab this one, drag this out as far as it'll let me. Sometimes you'll see up in the top it says failed to compute. Sometimes you can drag past it, sometimes it just doesn't want to work. This is one of those things where it's a limitation of the software. It's not as powerful as some of the other desktop ones. So let's drag that out to 1.5 because that's what it's letting me do. And then let's grab the bottom and we'll do 1.5 for that as well. And now we have a nicer, much nicer transition on this side than we did before. Now those sketches are going to be in my way, so I'm going to turn them off. They're not deleted, they're just turned off. Let's go 1.5 fillet, drag that out, 1.5 fillet, and there we go. Now we have a symmetrical ring to work with. Now these lines that you can see, they're a little bit distracting. If you wanted to get rid of those, you can go up here to the top left corner, to the export function, go down to image, and then you have the option on the bottom here. You can go layers, you can turn off the grid, you can turn off the background grid. This one's like the background, the color. And then there's this one, the edges off. And this will give us an idea of what this ring is going to look like as a solid object. You can then take a screenshot of this using that center button if you wanted to, but we're not done yet. So this will just give you an idea of what it looks like as you're working if you need to see. So for the stone in the middle, we did say that it was a 10 millimeter diameter. We've got snap-on, oops, 5 radius, there we go. And we just drew that straight on the top. You can sketch in this application on any flat surface. So let's go here and we'll just drag that down and we're now cutting into the model. I'm not entirely sure of the depth, but again, this is hypothetical. This is where you would want to have a stone in mind so you could actually measure it. If it's only 0.5 millimeter that you need, then you just go 0.5 millimeter extrusion and you're done. I think it's probably safer to do 2 millimeters, but it depends on what you're doing. So there's our basic ring. You can then go back, oops. You can then go here on the sides, fillet that down to 1 mil just so it's nice and clean. You can do this 1.5 just so you have a little bit to play with there. And then we'll do the inside one as well, 0.5. So anyway, there is our ring. Now it's very chunky, as you can see. This would be a very heavy piece. So an extra step that you can take, we'll just kind of go down here so we can see what's going on. We'll go over to the tools on the left, and we're going to find shell. Shell is going to allow us to select a face and then create a hollowed object with the certain wall thickness. So let's see how well this works. This tool is kind of hit or miss. It really depends on what you're doing. It works best on objects that are already solid, like a cube or a cylinder or something. This one definitely takes a little bit more finesse. You can actually create an outer shell, making it a certain thickness bigger, or you can create an inner shell. So what I've just done there, I tried anyway, 1 millimeter, nope, 1.5, nope, 0.75. There we go. So what I've done there is I've just created a 0.75 millimeter wall thickness, making this effectively a hollow ring. You may or may not want to do this. It really depends on what kind of jewelry you're making. As you can see, it's created like a hollow cup inside the ring that you would then seat your stone into, and it's got like, you know, almost, let's go back to the image, like screenshot, and we'll take a look at without those edge lines and what we've got here. So it's a nice smooth transition internally around that cup, and then you would set your stone. You might want to do this if you're working in gold, like high carat gold, and cost is an issue. Just using less is sometimes best. For casting, you do have to think a little bit more ahead when you get into the thin walls like this. 0.75, very, very thin. I would definitely not want to go under a millimeter if I at all could, but you know, this is a software limitation that it just kind of spat out at me unexpectedly. So not always the best, but just definitely something to consider. All right, so now that we have our model made, let's export this. Top left corner, let's go 3D print, and we'll name it something, blah, 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 whatever. And we're going to set the resolution to high. Remember, if you are using the free version, you'll only be able to use low. But either way, we'll export this, continue. Save this file, save 2 files, or you can airdrop it, whatever you're going to do next, if you're going to do anything at all. Then we'll put this into my rings file, and that's that. Okay, so now let's switch over into my next favorite software. This one is called Nomad Sculpt. Now, Nomad is more akin to ZBrush in every important way that I can think of as compared to Shapr. So I think it's worth explaining at this stage what the difference is between these two applications. So Shapr3d is called a direct modeling application. And what that means is that it's handling these 3D models in a geometric sense only. This is not to be confused with parametric. Parametrics is much more complicated, involving math and relationships involved with every aspect. This is just handling the geometry. It's much more simple, basically. Now, Nomad is handling things even more differently than that. It's handling them at a mesh level. Essentially, most 3D models are a mesh of polygons or little triangles. And what an application like this allows us to do is manipulate the mesh directly. So unlike Shapr, you can do much more organic things with these models from an STL file, because an STL is just a mesh. It's not, it's handling just the geometry that's in front of it, not anything else deeper than that. So with Nomad, you can go in and remesh. You can make these much more of a fine resolution. So you can see here when I go to voxel remesh, it puts this grid pattern over the model. And as I drag up, let's say 300, remesh, it's now remeshed it much, much finer. So that if I was to say, go to, I don't know, let's go to brush. Let's see what I have left over here. Let's go to a vector, or sorry, an alpha. So we'll turn on alphas. Let's go to something fancy here. Turn off the wireframe so you can see what's happening a little bit better. Let's subdivide. subdividing is turning all of those polygons in half. It's cutting everything in half, so you're effectively increasing your resolution. Let's lower the intensity, increase the radius. So you can add texture to your model if you want to. This is a vector file. Alphas. These are alphas, and they can be changed. You can create alphas in Procreate if you have that application as well on the iPad. Overall, it's a really cool thing. You can create these very, very simply in black and white and import them as is. And you can see the level of detail that we're getting with the mesh when you zoom in. All of this is technically printable. Now, I mean, to some degree, depends on your printer, depends on what you're trying to do. This level of mesh would be very, very difficult to print with. You have to think a lot bigger. I know when I first started out doing these types of models, I was having a lot of trouble with understanding the size, the scale of what I'm doing. When I create a design like this, it looks great up front, but in reality, we're talking like less than 0.1 millimeter in terms of depth, things like that. You gotta think, if it looks too big and too deep, it's probably just enough. So anyway, let's get rid of this model. Let's go over to the top left, project. I'm gonna go to import, load, and we'll find our blah, blah, blah ring and import that mesh into Nomad. Now from here, we'll go to, I'll just show you this. This is wireframe on. This is the level of polygons that Shapr automatically generates. You can see that these ones up here, much, much smaller than something down here. And that's a bit of a problem for adding texture and doing things with these mesh because they're inconsistent. So like I was doing before, we're gonna go up to voxel remesh, this grid pattern. I'm just gonna type in 300 remesh. Now what this is gonna do is remesh the entire object so it's all nice and even and grid-like. So if we go back, if I just double tap, you can see the difference. Down here in the bottom left, there's a history. You can go back through the history you can do the entire project start to finish and then go all the way back to the start if you wanted to. So it's pretty cool. So there's the difference. Now let's say I wanted to drag. You can just drag this out. That's meshed. Let's go back to the root. Let's try dragging that out again. And you can see it gets much more pixelated and broken, especially down in this area here. Now there is a brush called Smooth, so you can go back over that and smooth it out, but it's still a little weird. So now we've remeshed the entire thing, and that's great. Now let's say we wanted to set a stone in this. What we can do, you could do it a couple ways. You can use the drag tool, and you can drag up some prongs like so. Kind of change the camera angle here. You can drag them inwards, and they're very, very rough, loose looking natural prongs, which might be your aesthetic. Nothing wrong with that. And we can, I mean, you'd be pushing the prongs in to set a stone, so let's kind of pull them out a little bit, and then you got a little bit more space to play with. And maybe that's all you want. You're done. Hooray. But let's go back. Let's say you want some more cylindrical prongs. We can go over to scene, top left, this kind of like ladder icon. We can go to primitives, go cylinder. And what this is doing is it's adding another object into the scene. And this is our object. It's just a simple little cylinder. We have the gizmo. Gizmo is the term we use for this orientation type looking thing. So we'll just drag this over into the corners, more or less. You can change the orientation with the ball working X, Y, and Z. So for prongs, when we're looking down, maybe we want to have them angled outwards a little bit. So we'll use the blue one, change it up. more or less still vertical, but a little bit off. Go mirror, and now it's on the opposite side, and everything we do on one is going to be reflected on the other side. So we'll bring up these little prongs, and we can go back up into the scene, cylinder, and maybe what we'll do is we'll duplicate, make this again, drag that across, and look at that. Now we have 4 very tall, very tall prongs. Cool. So now that this is, these prongs are actually on a separate layer, which is great because if we were to go around and play with some of the brushes that we can now do, they're not affected by what we can play with next. Let's get rid of those though. Let's just make them disappear. Let's say you wanted to add a texture to the entirety of this ring. So let's go down to the left side. We'll go mask. We'll mask off the center because we were going to set a stone in there. So naturally we don't really want texture. It doesn't make any sense. Go on to the right side, top right, brush. And we'll go into the brush specific things. So let's do something fun. Yeah, actually, let's just use this honeycomb pattern. Honeycomb, tiling, we're going to set that to 1. Scale, fall off. This is actually kind of cool. You can preset this so that you can change what the walls look like of the honeycomb. Do you want them to be really sharp? Do you want them to be more rounded off or very square? Depends on what you want. Let's go down to stroke type. So dot is like this, where you're as you're painting, you're effectively putting that pattern all over the design. That's a very messy way to go. It works great for some things, but in this case, we want it to be, let's go dynamic radius. So as we can drag it and create the honeycomb. Now this is very big. Let's turn the intensity down so that it's a little bit more shallow. It's hard to say exactly how deep this honeycomb is right now, but let's put it in perspective. So if this circle, so if this circle is 10 millimeter, 20 millimeter diameter, 10 millimeter radius, then the depth of this is probably 0.5, give or take. Again, hard to say, we're just ballparking, but this gives you kind of an idea. And let's add, over here you can see this button, symmetry on the right. You can get rid of that, and then you're just working freeform. And we can kind of try to blend these together. Sometimes you might want to leave symmetry on, and then everything, you can kind of line everything up. You'll notice these look a little bit blocky, but we can go to smooth, go over them. If that's a bit too much, actually, let's go forward again, sorry. We'll lower the intensity of smooth, and then it's not taking away as much. And you can play around with that. There you go. Go back to brush, and we'll create another one of these, just so that it works. And you can even play with this symmetry, X, Y, and Z. It really depends on all the planes. You can do some really crazy, funky mandalas really fast with that method. And you'll notice that the center is still dark, which means that none of the texture has actually been applied to that, so that is still fine. As we're doing this brush, the honeycomb thing, on the left, there's this button over here called sub. That means that we can go in and subtract or add, depending on what we're doing. Now that's addition. Now if we go sub, now it's subtractive, and we're making an impression. This isn't necessarily something you might want to do in this particular case, because it's really kind of weird to go from a raised to a lower, but it's still something you can do. Go smooth, go over that, and you'll notice that it also applied to the inside of the ring. You can go back down here and go apply, cancel. You can go back down to apply front facing vertex only. So let's go back, try that again. Where'd it go? Brush. Oh, I think I turned it off on the wrong brush. Front facing vertices only. There we go. Now you see it's not applying at all to the inside of the ring, which is good. Maybe you don't want that at all. You just want a nice polished inside. So it's very, very fluid. It's very dynamic. What do you want to make with this? This application is great. You can, in theory, just use Nomad to create this shape. I just like bringing it over because using a direct to model type of application means that I have full control over the size of what I'm working on. I don't have to worry about scale. You'll notice on this whole canvas, what do those squares mean? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you can set it up somewhere in here, but it's just one less thing that I need to worry about when I know that what I'm importing is already sized correctly. So from there, let's just call it quits. This is the very, very basic tutorial, not even a tutorial, just to kind of showing you what I do. And then from there we can save as and export this as a full STL, which is then ready for 3D printing. Because I have the Prusa SL1, I prefer Prusa Slicer, but I'm not going to get too much into that because that's kind of a separate topic. Thank you very much for watching. This is been the two applications that we use in our workflow. I hope you found this insightful. I will see you guys in the next video.